The Egyptian Air Force was caught cold. In the first wave of attacks, 11 air bases were obliterated.
All the Egyptian aircraft destroyed, and no one aircraft could make the off because runways destroyed.
The Israeli plan of targeting runways first had worked perfectly. Unable to take off, Egyptian aircraft were sitting ducks.
I would say the success was beyond our thoughts, beyond what we expected.
How had the Egyptians been caught so unaware? Just 2 days before, the Israelis had appeared to be coming off the high state of alert.
Anyone in London can pick up the Jerusalem Post, and that means everyone in every Arab capital knows that the Israeli army is stood down and getting a little bit of swimming practice in.
Had the decision to send Israeli soldiers home for the weekend caused the Egyptians to relax their guard?
You use as much deception as you can possibly apply so that the Egyptians will be looking elsewhere when the blow comes.
Conventional military planning pointed to dawn being the ideal time for an attack.
Traditionally, this is when you start a war in order to use the sun to be in the eyes of the defending enemy. So if you attack from east to the west, you do it in the morning, so he has his sun in his eyes.
At dawn, the Egyptian Air Force would be in a high state of alert, but not for long.
You have a high dawn readiness, which is normal. Then the tension goes down, people go to breakfast, things happen, shifts are changed.
This was the time to catch them on the ground, unfueled, when they almost totally vulnerable.
But how did the Israelis know what this time would actually be?
To succeed in such an operation, you need three things: intelligence, intelligence, and intelligence.
Intelligence gathered on the Egyptian Air Force routine was critical.
The routine of activity was detected mainly by listening to the nets of communications between the planes and the ground.
So you take the routine and you see that 7:45 is the best time to catch the enemy not organized enough against our attack.
At 7:45 a.m., virtually the entire Egyptian Air Force would be on the ground. Israel exploited this weakness.
This is the smartest decision in preparation of the 67 war.
Add to that the intense training of its pilots, and Israel was able to quickly gain the upper hand.
We knew almost everything which was going on the other side. Where was the real aircraft parking? Where were the dummies parking? Where are the munition storage? Where are the bomb storages? We knew everything.
Intelligence had revealed when and where the Egyptian Air Force was most vulnerable. But how did pilots like Yalo Shavit and Dan Sever avoid being detected by Arab early warning stations?
We needed to fly below the radar coverage. No communication, no radio, no nothing. Silence. Total silence. You, the aircraft, and the ground flying like crazy.
Israeli aircraft approached Egypt flying fast and low over the Mediterranean. 500 miles per hour at an altitude of just below 100 feet.
If you are not cautious, you get very close to the water's level. And this is very, very dangerous.
There's nothing in the world beside you watching the horizon, watching the direction, and that's all. All your muscles are stressed, you are in total concentration, and you don't look around. When you do this or that, that's a mistake. You might, in the split of a second, touch the water. And once you touch the water, this was it. Down you go.
These calculated risks and elaborate deceptions paid off. The vital element of surprise had been kept intact until the very last moment. Shavit approached his target flying a Super Mystère fighter.
We are standing in front of the large air intake of the Super Mystère B2, which this huge intake was required to suck a lot of air into the engine when you operated the afterburner. And this is the gun sight camera. No cheating anymore. This was it. Whenever you push the trigger, the camera took the picture, and this came back to the debriefings.
The recent addition of the gun sight camera meant Air Force commanders could rapidly evaluate just how successful the first wave of attacks had been. Dan Severe's pilot's logbook reveals that he would fly a further 2 missions that day. Many pilots would complete 5 by nightfall on June 5th. In less than 12 hours, the Egyptian Air Force was virtually wiped out.
It ended up losing 85% of the Egyptian Air Force, and that meant practically that you had no air cover and that all your ground troops are bare in the desert.
The Israelis are absolutely staggered by their success. They hoped they could disable the Egyptian Air Force, and at the end of the day, they had destroyed it.
On top of that, hammer blows had been dealt to the air forces of both Syria and Jordan. Israel had achieved air superiority. Their ground forces could now take center stage. The focus of operations would be the Sinai Desert, where the borders of Egypt and Israel meet. A vast expanse of difficult terrain, much of it impassable sand dunes. The Egyptians had constructed formidable defenses in the Sinai. A head-on clash would have been potentially disastrous for the Israelis. How could they find a way of overcoming both the Sinai's terrain and the Egyptian fortifications? Benny Mickelson has investigated Israel's strategy.
They have to penetrate in between their strongholds and to reach their rear and their flanks.
If the Egyptians could be struck swiftly and from an unexpected direction, then Israel could penetrate deep into enemy territory. But the Sinai Desert's soft sand dunes presented a serious obstacle for wheeled vehicles. Yet the Israelis were able to advance relatively easily. In the early 1960s, the Israelis had conducted experiments in their own desert, the Negev. This demonstration shows the kind of tests that would have taken place. Soldiers practiced driving vehicles through soft dunes. When they got bogged down, they had to learn how to get themselves out.
The problem is that because they are using wheels, the contact between the wheel and the terrain is relatively low and narrow. So you have to decrease the air into the tires in order to have more contact between the wheel and the ground.
Letting air out of the Jeep's tires gives the wheels more traction and allows the vehicle to gain enough momentum to get moving again. A simple but ingenious solution. The result was that the Israelis could advance through areas that the Egyptians least expected. But sand wasn't the only obstacle waiting for the Israelis in the Sinai. This Egyptian tank was state-of-the-art technology in 1967. It's typical of the fearsome weaponry that faced the Israelis in the Sinai Desert. Within the space of 48 hours, hundreds of these tanks would be knocked out by Israel's much smaller forces. How was such an unlikely victory achieved?
Each Israeli division that goes into the Sinai faces 2 Egyptian divisions. Behind those 2 Egyptian divisions is one more Egyptian reserve division. So that means the Israeli divisions are fighting with a 3-to-1 disadvantage. In any staff college in the world, they'll tell you, do not attack with less than a 3-to-1 advantage.
Overcoming such odds would mean tackling the Sinai's intimidating terrain. Tanks may appear as though they can go anywhere in any terrain, but there's a limit to the steepness of the slopes they can climb.
If the dune is more than 20 degrees on the climbing slope, so all the tanks and APCs cannot climb the dune.
The Egyptians knew that in the Sinai there were dunes that were just too steep. So they arranged their defenses on the basis that an attack would come down the few roads through the desert.